All right, what is up, everybody, and welcome to another author reading here on day one of TBRCon 2023. And I have the pleasure today of being joined by Kritika H. How are you?
I am well. How are you, Adrian?
I'm very well, thank you. So today, Kritika is going to be doing a reading from her book, The Surviving Sky. We've also got a little Q&A lined up for later, so send in your questions if you're watching this live on YouTube. And Kritika, can you tell me a little bit about your book and give a synopsis as well?
Sure. So I'm not going to read you the official synopsis, but so the book is science fantasy, and it is a story about a husband-wife duo who are trying to save their marriage while they're trying to save their floating plant city from crashing into jungle storms. I love this book. It is the first of a trilogy. And it's just so full of like Hindu philosophy and discussions of consciousness and romance, especially between like over 30s married protagonists, which is just wonderful, and you don't often get to see that in epic science fantasy. So I'm really excited to share this book with everyone.
Yeah, I've had the pleasure of reading it, and I've talked with my SFF Addicts co-host MJ Kuhn about it. But we really both enjoyed the book. But for me, you brought up this marriage aspect. So it's like a married couple who are two of the main POVs, the big POVs in the book. For you, why was it this kind of like the central relationship that you chose for these characters?
I think it kind of speaks to the Hindu philosophy that I was really kind of trying to like hone in on.
Hmm.
A lot of Hindu philosophy is so much about the duality of the subjective and the objective, and things like that. And especially with the two protagonists, like Ahilya and Ravan, for me, it was just such a natural like narrative with them. Like one thing when you kind of start reading The Surviving Sky is you feel like one person is right until you get into the other person's perspective, and then you're like, oh my god, I think they're right too.
Hmm.
It has more than answers. I think Surviving Sky has like so many questions that it kind of raises about philosophy, about people, about their motivations and characteristics and all of that. And Ahilya and Ravan are such like opposites, but they're also so complementary in so many significant ways. They are so similar, but they're always like clashing, but they also love each other so much. And it's
Hmm.
just like, after a point, you're like, oh my God, get your shit together and like just like be with each other. But also, when you're like reading the perspectives, you totally see why, it's not as simple an answer as that, because they're so passionate about what they believe in.
Hmm.
Um, in the story, Iravan is an architect, a magical architect, essentially, and he's one of the few people in the world who is so privileged. And Ahilya is a non-architect, a non-magical person, and she has like very little power. And I just love the duality of that, like the push
Hmm.
and pull. Like from a cosmic level, but also like at a global level, and also just at a personal level, the
Hmm.
fact that they have this power and privilege play between them, but also they are so deeply in love with each other. So all of that was just a fantastic like exploration of power and privilege for me.
Definitely, like the power dynamics of this relationship and how that plays out
Yeah.
on this epic scale. I think I joked on Twitter when I finished the book. I tagged you in it, and you laughed about this book is like marriage therapy through just dire circumstances and epic
Yeah.
scale. Is like, yeah. And MJ Johnson in the comments said, "How many married couple SFF books do you ever see?" And so it's like, I completely agree. It's really, you know, difficult on one hand to find SFF books that represent
Yeah.
marriage,
Yeah.
um, but also like the complexities of it. Obviously, there's like some books that represent healthy relationships
Yeah.
and other books that represent troubled relationships and that kind of stuff. But marriage is something that is often not talked about in
Yeah.
in science fiction and fantasy. So I really appreciate you tackling that through these characters.
Thank you. Yeah, I actually did like I remember I did this like it was so funny. It was such a like a bad TikTok that I did, but it really hit the numbers because that's what happens with TikTok.
Yeah.
And one of the videos, I was kind of talking about married couples, and I kind of referenced Dune. Um and Leto and Jessica,
Hmm.
and one of the commenters there said, "Well, they're not married," and I'm like, "Well, that's the point. Like, you hardly ever see married couples on screen, especially in science
Hmm.
fiction, fantasy, or even like in books." And yeah, they're not married. Jessica and Leto are not married, but they're the closest comparison I could kind of get to, when it comes to Ahelia and Iravan, especially them being married, and the kind of power
Hmm.
dynamic that kind of plays out. Yeah, so I was really excited to kind of explore this, oft unseen part of SFF.
Yeah.
Yeah, over 30s protagonists and all of that was just really exciting to me, because so many of us grew up on SFF, and like we're all kind of like,
Yeah.
a lot of us are in our 30s, and we're just like, well, where's our representation? And I guess
Hmm.
this is it. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, I'm going to show the cover for it.
Yeah, it's such a gorgeous cover.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I love this cover so much, because I always encourage readers, like when they look at the cover, like to actually zoom in on the cover.
Hmm.
Like I want people to like take like a magnifying glass to it and look through it, because honestly, that's what I did.
Hmm.
And the sheer details that just pop, like that is so intrinsic to the surviving sky, like the
Hmm.
kind of book that it is. Like, you read it, and like the way that I kind of wrote it, for myself as a reader, because that's the kind of stuff that I enjoy, was very much like, I want to read it again and notice details a second time around and a third
Hmm.
time around. And the cover just does so much justice to that. Like the more you look into it, you're like, oh my god, like that's so cool, like I didn't notice that the first time. Well,
Yeah.
just beautiful. Yeah.
Oh, amazing. And what's the section of the book that you're going to be reading from today? And why did you decide to choose that particular section?
So the part of the book that I'm reading today is just the first chapter. It's Ahelia's perspective. um, One of the things that, and again, this was very intentional when I was writing the book, is to have the first chapter be Ahelia's perspective, because she is in this beautiful fantasy world where, magic is so dependent, like people are so dependent on magic for survival. Like she is the person who has no magic,
Hmm.
and she is still trying to make, a mark in the world, like whether it is for survival, whether to be important, and or just kind of leave like some kind of impact. So that was very intentional when I started writing the book, to have her be, chapter one, as opposed to
Hmm.
Eravan, who is her husband, who has power and all of that. Like he is, he comes a little bit later. um, so yeah, that's a part that I'm picking, because I think it's just a wonderful introduction into the world and the magic from a person who does not have any power and might not fully understand, the magic herself. So, but still, like, is a very, very important piece of the society. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, Kritika, I will let you take it away.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, then. The Surviving Sky by Kritika H. Rao. Chapter 1, Ahelia. The bracken didn't react to Ahelia as it should have. She tried again, drawing her desire for the leaves to part to a single point. Open, I want to see. It was unnatural, eerie almost, how defined the plants were. It was as if her limbs refused to move despite the command of her mind. She stood alone on a wide, curving terrace of her airborne city, Nakshar. An hour earlier, a dozen citizens had flocked to the promenade, seeking a final look at the open skies before Nakshar landed in the jungle. Ahelia had yearned for solitude, unwilling to conduct her study in front of them. But now she gazed at the empty bark benches, the shady trees, the soft moss floor. Everything looked the same. Then why did the bracken wall behave so differently? It had been waist high earlier, a mere parapet, but now it towered over her, growing rapidly. Tendrils curled into tight, thorny balls. Branches squeezed together, twisting in intricate lattices. The entire structure hardened as though to deny her, and none of it responded to her desire to see beyond the city. Ahelia jogged alongside the wall until she found a small gap in the leafy growth. There, below thick clouds within a twilight sky, waited the earth's surface. She unslung the satchel from her shoulder. Eyes on the gap, she rummaged until she found her telescope, then dropped the bag gently by her feet. Ahelia pressed the telescope to her face so hard it pinched her skin. The image focused just in time for her to see another dust explosion. Her breath quickened. There was a pattern to the dust, a shift she had theorized once. For the first time, she was viewing the epicenter of the fading storm. Her hands itched to take the tablet and stylus from the satchel to draw the patterns, but there was no time. The leaves on the city's walls were morphing too fast. She'd just have to commit the explosion to memory. Dark green shuttered her vision. Ahelia lowered her telescope and peered through the foliage, but the wall was relentless again. Come on, she muttered. What is wrong with you? Open up a little bit at least. Nakshar's plants won't respond to non-architects anymore, an amused voice called out. Ahilya spun around. Nella stepped off an ascending wooden pedestal that had emerged from a hole in the floor. She was dressed in her architect's uniform, an embroidered green kurta reaching her knees flared over narrow pleated trousers. Her long translucent robe wafted in the breeze. Thick black beads looped around Nella's neck. More beads, bracelets, and rings clinked around her wrists and fingers, held together by thin, glassy optical fibers. The junior architect was perhaps 25, nearly a decade younger than Ahilya, but the Rudra beads indicated more responsibility for their flying city than Ahilya would ever be granted. All Ahilya owned was her obligatory citizen ring. Ordinary citizens no longer have any control over the architecture, Nella repeated, striding forward. Ahilya forced a smile. Great, you're here. I think I saw something, this incredible pattern of dust that might reveal the source of instability down there. Will you open the wall for me? I want to sketch it. You want to draw dust. I want to draw dust during landing, Ahilya corrected. It's the best way to understand Earth rages. Oh, I can explain those to you, Nella said, flicking a lock of dark hair behind her. They're cataclysmic storms. Yes, thank you. I'm trying to understand why they happen at all. Because of a disruption of consciousness. No, I meant, why did Earth rages begin in the first place? They've been around as long as we have. How did. Really, Ahilya, the junior architect said, sniffing. These questions have already been answered. And these dust patterns you want to draw? The architects have studied those for years. Ahilya turned back to the wall. She had asked the architects for their drawings, but they had summarily rejected her requests, citing their records as privileged architect information, a slap on the face she had never received before. Right, fine. Thanks for that, she said. Could you open this, please? I might still be able to get a few rough sketches. I can't. Sure, you can. You're an architect, aren't you? The plants literally shift at your behest. Nella gave her an unimpressed look. That's very reductive. How can you be married to a senior architect and not know the intricacies of trajection? We try not to talk about it lest we begin arguing about how we see the world, Ahilya said. Her voice remained mild. The workings of plant manipulation had always been too esoteric for her, but the truth was that ever since her husband had been promoted to the council, the two had stopped talking about each other's pursuits altogether. Her fingers scrabbled at the leaves. Please, you don't have to open it all, just enough for me to see. I can't, Nella said, exasperated, as though dealing with a child. Now that there's finally another lull in the earth rages, and now that we're finally landing, the temple architects have enforced higher limits on the architecture. That's why non architects don't have any control. But you're, yes, I know, but I'm a junior architect. Anything that doesn't align with the temple's guidance is almost impossible to do, especially by me. And they're closing the city. Look around you. I'd be trying to fly against a windstream. Ahilya released her hold on the wall. Loose leaves glided down onto the moss floor, but the floor wasn't moss anymore. It was transforming into bark. The benches and trees were gone. From all sides, thorny bushes rushed towards them, eating the curve of the terrace in their hungry approach. Even the bracken wall had extended, entrapping the terrace in a dome. Leaves and stems crisscrossed in 100 different layers as the foliage tightened. Darkness would fall in seconds. Ahilya's brows furrowed. Nakshar had always been a flat city flying in the sky. Its architect formed hills with massive trees that housed the library and schools and homes usually spanned acres. Checkered fields grew on the edges. And rainwater was harvested in rocky pools and waterfalls. She had never heard of the architecture changing so completely. Relax, Nella said. The council will release permissions beyond the temple again as soon as we land. Non architects will be able to mold the architecture, and this part of the terrace will transform into an entry point closest to the jungle. Shouldn't affect your expedition. Ahelia frowned and stepped away from the wall, the dust pattern she'd wanted to study forgotten. There was something in Nela's casual words, a message she did not understand. She glanced at the unresponsive architecture, studied Nela's insouciant stance, thought about the easy assurances. A prickle of worry climbed the back of her neck. She had lived in Nakshar all her life, but matters in the city had been changing recently. Hardly anyone paid attention, but Ahilia had kept track. First, it had been the suppression of architects' records. Then the fight to get her expedition approved. Now this control was being taken away from the citizens, surely but subtly. One way or another, a dangerous pattern. The weight of this realization grew, pressing her shoulders down. In the end, wasn't that what life in the flying cities was really about? The lack of autonomy she and others like her had over their own lives? Ahilia's expedition, her dealings with Dhruv, the vacant council seat she was eyeing, everything she had done all her life was to balance this inequity. But things were coming to a head now. She could feel it. She cleared her throat and returned her attention to Nella. Why was the design changed? I told you they've enforced higher limits. Yes, but why? The junior architect tilted her head and studied her for a long second. Then she smiled. For architect reasons, she said coolly. Why does a historian care to go into the jungle? She added, asking her own question. Aren't there detailed accounts of our histories in the libraries? Ahilia flinched. The questions were calculated insults. Nella knew Ahilia was an archaeologist, not a historian. She knew any histories of the world were her histories, architect histories. She knew why Ahilia explored the jungle. Life had begun there, and Ahilia's entire research was to find a way to return to it again, to find survival on land instead of architect dependent cities in the sky. This was a deliberate attempt to bait her. Either that or Nella had learned nothing from the documents Ahilia had provided to prepare for the expedition. It was likely beneath the junior architect to take any instruction from a non architect. Refusing to indulge either attempt to shame her, Ahilia snapped the telescope shut and dropped to her knees to place it back into her satchel. If only they would tell her. Nella had mentioned the recent earth rage as a reason behind this new design, and based on that alone, Ahilia could have helped the architect, shared information about what she discovered, even studied something for them. But she was a non architect, a pretender. What use was an archaeologist in a civilization that had only ever known flight? Ahilia had practically invented the term. They were not going to tell her anything. The junior architect was simply reminding her of her place. Ahilia pushed aside her strain with an effort, closed her satchel, and rose to her feet. In the few seconds it had taken her to repack her instrument, the terrace had closed entirely, so that she and Nella stood face to face on a square of bark. Thorny bushes enveloped them from all sides, obscuring any view. So where are Dhruv and Om? Ahilia asked, referring to the other two members of her team. Nella tilted her head. They're in the temple, with the rest of the citizens. Why? I told them to assemble here. Iravanve, he insisted the temple was the safest place until Nakshar had fully landed. The respectful suffix attached to her husband as an architect, but never to Ahilia as an archaeologist, grated on Ahilia. Her hand curled tightly around her satchel. Iravan had abandoned her for 7 months, and now he thought to give orders to her team without her knowledge. All of her restrained irritation bubbled up, tightening her throat. And they listened, she said. Even Om? Om tried to protest, saying you needed us here. And Dhruv, well, I don't think Dhruv wanted to go toe to toe with a counselor. Om was only as old as Nella. Iravan would have intimidated the boy with a glance. As for Dhruv, ever since his last few inventions had failed, The Sanjinier had become wary of disturbing the council. Ahelia's closest friend he might be, but Dhruv wouldn't openly oppose senior architect Iravan. I see, she said. Iravan requested you go to the temple too. That's why I'm here. I'm supposed to bring you there. Bring me! Escort you, Nella said. Request you. I didn't demand it. But he might as well have, Ahelia completed, her teeth gritted. Nella shook her head in furious protest. No, no, not like that. It's a matter of safety. No one should be out here. Ahelia remained rooted. The dome above was a mere handbreadth away now. Sharp pointed leaves reached so low they tickled her ears, but the instant they made contact with her skin, the pinpoints shed themselves. Instead, the stem budded softer leaves. Ahelia smelled the warm, sticky sap of regeneration. If she didn't move soon, she'd be entombed in a layer of foliage. Naksha's living architecture would sheathe her in her own personal wooden armor. That had been Ahelia's plan for her and her expeditionary team. Rage Ravan and his raging interference. I'm staying here, she said, voice cool. You can tell Iravanway that. That's the reading. I hope you guys enjoyed that.
All right. Well, thank you so much. That was brilliant, Kritika. Thank you.
Thank you.
I hope your cough is okay though.
Yeah, it's oh, you know what? It's just that time of the year, also like here in Canada where the weather is just so up and down. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. We have a question in the chat. This book sounds really fascinating. Is this going to be a series or standalone? So if you could, I think this is a trilogy, correct? The Rages trilogy. Can
Yeah,
you
it is a
elaborate on that a little
trilogy.
bit?
Yeah, for sure. It is a trilogy. And the first one, of course, is out on June 13th via Titan Books. I love the trilogy. I have to say the book works really well though as a standalone as well, you know. So if that's the kind of thing that you're kind of looking for, you're like, I don't know if I want to dip into a whole trilogy, I would still encourage you to give it a shot because I think like the book does really well as a standalone as well. Of course,
Mhm.
like I hope that, you know, you read book 2 and 3, it, you know, the Ahilia and Raman's journey, like it is so fascinating to me. Like they develop so much and the world itself develops so much. Um, that, you know, especially book 2 and 3, I've finished writing book 2 already. I'm working midway through book 3 and my hope is to finish it before June when the first book is actually out. So I
Nice.
badly want to finish the entire trilogy before the first book is out because it's just something that I'm trying to do you know, for
Mhm.
myself, just to push myself. So if you are a reader who's just like, you know, I don't want to invest in a whole trilogy because I don't know if it's gonna, you know, be finished, etc.,
Mhm.
rest assured that it will be finished because I'm basically almost you know, almost done anyway. So yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question.
Excellent. And how interconnected, or is it a continuing story from book 1 to the end of book 3?
Yeah, it is an interconnected story. I mean, book, you know, with the caveat that, you know, I'm still awaiting edits, but book 2 kind of takes off almost like just a couple of months after book 1, and book 3 also just takes off a couple of months after book 2. So it's all very, very interconnected.
Awesome. And I will say, as someone who has read the book, that the first book, like you say, it does end on a note where it's like, it's not a bash you in the face,
Yeah.
blatant cliffhanger or anything like
Yeah.
that. It is wrapped up very, very
Yeah.
nicely, but it also leads a lot into a, you know, the eventual sequel. Like there's a lot of questions that are unanswered, but
Yeah.
the main thrust of the narrative and that main storyline, all of that is answered in a very, very satisfying way. So
Thank you. I appreciate that. My hope is that like both, you know, all three books, like book 1, book 2, book 3, very much have their own arcs, but they're so interconnected that it is like one big, you know, arc in and of itself as well. So, um, yeah, my hope is that people enjoy reading all of them.
oh, I think they will. And tomorrow, Kritika will be on a panel which I am moderating called The Intersection of Nature and Technology, where we're going to be elaborating on some of the stuff that you brought up today, which for me personally is super fascinating in terms of, you know, a nature-based magic system and the ways in which technology, this kind of like relationship between the technology and magic and nature within the world that you've created, as well as sort of like some of the aspects of Hindu philosophy and um, religion and stuff like that that you've brought in, which does deal a lot with nature,
Yeah.
as far as my understanding goes. So I'm really, really excited about that.
Thank you. Yeah, I am too. It should be a good panel.
All right, cool. Well, we will close it out there, Kritika. I'm going to show the cover one more time. And someone in the chat said, I'd pick up that cover at a bookstore, which is a
Yeah.
very, very good sign.
Yeah.
So there's The Surviving Sky with that beautiful cover. And that is out on June 13th
Yep.
through Titan Books. And what formats will that be available in?
It's available in paperback, ebook, audiobook is also coming out around the same time. So yeah.
Nice. Amazing. Cool. And Kritika, where can people find you on social media?
Um, well, Twitter is a bit of a mess. I am still on it, but I am also on Instagram and TikTok. Most often on Instagram on my stories, and my handle is at Kritika H Rao. So what you see, my name just without the dot and without spaces. So Kritika H Rao.
Perfect. And she does get real on her Instagram talking about parenting and stuff, which I can relate to.
It's
So
true. Yeah, yeah. I have a 1-year-old, and yeah, he is a handful, and I do tell stories about that.
yeah, it's beautiful though. And Kritika, thank you again for taking the time
Yeah.
to do this tonight. And yeah, I'll see you tomorrow.
See you soon.
All right. And thank you everyone for watching. Thank you for the questions in the live chat. And enjoy the rest of TBRCon week, everybody. Bye.
Okay. Bye.